Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us. This is Donor Egg Bank USA's webinar on processing emotions, disclosure decisions, and taking the next step toward donor egg conception. My name is Becca Murillo, and joining me tonight is Mayu Quevedo. Mayu is a licensed marriage and family therapist. She's very well versed in third-party reproduction, and we're really excited to have her joining us tonight to discuss these topics with us.
Thank you. Is my screen on, Becca?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thanks. I just can't see myself. All right.
So I want to just mention at the end of the presentation, we will review the question and answer. We'll have a question and answer session. So if you have any questions, we ask that you please submit your questions in the Q&A feature. It should be at either the top or the bottom of your screen. All of the questions are anonymous, and we will get to them at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, Mayu.
Thank you so much, Becca. It is such a pleasure to be able to be here presenting on this important topic. I have been so blessed to have been working with many families that are hoping to expand their family through using a donor. And it's been such a blessing because I have met so many of them, when they're trying to conceive with their own gametes and then really contemplating and processing through all of the different feelings and concerns that come with considering using a donor. And then later on, fast forward, getting some, pictures and emails and calls about how, everything just came together for them. So I'm hoping that the information that I'll be able to share with you will be helpful as you're contemplating this important decision. And I'm going to just give you a quick summary of some of the things that we'll be talking about. First of all, I always like to start off with this important concept of opening your heart to the child that you're meant to have. And so there is a process, of course, to come to that point, and we will look into that deeply. And then we'll talk about some common concerns for most people that are contemplating using a donor. And then everything kind of builds up on itself. So once you open your heart, you address the concerns, then selecting a donor is something that's really, really important. And then disclosure is something that I am really looking forward to talking about. I'm a marriage and family therapist and play therapist. And so, so many people ask, how do I disclose, talk about their concerns in relation to disclosure. And so I will spend some time talking about that as well. And then Becca will finish out the presentation, talking about a game plan for finances and timing, and then looking towards the future. So let me go now to the next slide and just beginning with the aspect of opening your heart to the child that you're meant to have. And so to be able to get to that place, you've been through a journey. Everybody's journey is so different. I meet with people that have spent years, trying treatments, and some people that just jump right into it because they meet with the doctor and they say, this is the best option. Nevertheless, to get to the place where you can fully open your heart to the child that you're meant to have, you kind of have to reflect on where you've been. And so I generated this next slide, which has a summary of some of the very common things that people that have gone through the fertility journey have experienced. And I'm not going to read all of these out loud, but as you look into these feelings and emotional reactions and physical symptoms, many of you are going to be able to relate to this. And so you really have to spend some time processing, right, all of the feelings that you've had, all of the challenges that you have overcome. And in doing so, what you're really doing is you're giving yourself that time of reflection to also grant yourself some grace and compassion and self-love, because everything that you've been through is part of what has led you to where you are right now. And so along with this, with all of these feelings, is also the grief process that is a very normal thing for people navigating through this journey. So in the next slide, you will see a summary of the 5 stages of grief by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. You all might be familiar with these stages of grieving. But what makes this very unique to fertility is that, so typically when, let's say we lose a loved one, right? You go through a linear process of grieving. You get waves that come and go, but you move through denial, anger, sadness, and then you come with acceptance. There might be times where you reach certain milestones and feelings come up again. But what makes it unique in family building and infertility is that you kind of go through these in a cyclical way. So it's a series of losses that you might have experienced. And so, for example, I don't know if, many people don't know this, but infertility is ranked as high on the stress scale as a terminal illness is. And partly it's because it's a complete interruption of your developmental life cycle. And so, you grow up thinking, these are the way things are going to evolve, but then you get to this place where you hit a wall, right? And things aren't happening. And so that's a loss in itself. It's an existential crisis. Other losses include, when you're trying to conceive every month, you go through this cycle of grief over and over again. And then, maybe I tested too early, or, and then you have the feelings of anger and then bargaining in terms of, just promising everything that you will do and be, if it works out. Negative pregnancy tests also, is a loss of, there's financial stressors, of course, that play a huge part. You could also have lost a child, a pregnancy. You feel like you've lost time. Struggling with faith also can be a big one. And so all of these things are part of the grieving process. And you want to ask yourself, how have you processed these feelings? Going through infertility, going through challenges and family building can seem like a very lonely place. You might feel like you're, the only person in your circle that is experiencing this. Some people know a lot of people, but nevertheless, regardless of the situation, to be able to open your heart fully and be ready to proceed and using a donor to build your family, it's just so important that you give yourself the grace, that you give yourself the time to really reflect on taking care of your feelings. That can look like, you can have a good circle of friends and support and people you trust, that you can process this with your partner, or counseling, or just journaling, or really just maybe educating yourself on what is normal, right? And I know when I counsel people, there's just such a sense of relief when I bring some of these things up, and to normalize that, and just for them to know that it's just part of the process and that it's so normal. And in the next slide, something that I also want to talk about is the concerns, right, that come with everything. Because remember, everything that we're talking about is part of what's going to help you get to that place where you can open your heart to the potential for the possibilities in terms of using a donor. But these are all of the steps that have to come before that. And so some of the common concerns that come with contemplating that decision include just worrying about the well-being of the child. As I said, I'm a play therapist. And one of the things that I fully know is that parents always want to do what's in the best interest of their child. And even before you become a parent, you start worrying about that, right? And so some of the concerns are, is my child, how will they feel? Are they going to be sad? Are they going to be upset? Are they going to be treated differently? Are they going to be picked on? To tell or not to tell, that's something that kind of is an accumulation of all of these other concerns. But I think that one of the most important concerns is the well-being of the child for people. Now, what I will tell you though is wellness for children really stems from secure attachment. And one of the presentations that I saw recently from there's a researcher out of the United Kingdom called Susan Gollenbach that has done extensive research on donor-kissing families. And, the title of a presentation that I saw is "The Children Are Okay." And I think more than anything, it comes from healthy attachment. And so the quality of a parent-child relationship is really not related to gametes at all, right? It's related to just building that bond of love and security. It's also very important if you are in a relationship, the quality of the relationship is also very important. There is it's the Relationship Institute, and the founders are Gottman and Gottman, and they talk about how they assess the quality of a relationship. And they say, we can do questionnaires, we can do interviews, or we can just take a sample of their children's urine and measure the levels of cortisol. And so the child's well-being is going to be influenced by so many, many, many things. But I always encourage people to read on attachment theory, because that is huge, really, in just creating well-adjusted human beings. Another very common concern is the legitimacy of parenthood. So what does that mean? It's very common, and I hear it so often, that women will say, well, I'm just afraid that I'm not going to feel like I'm the real mom, right? And is that the way that my child is going to look at me? There are some concerns, about future contact. If is the donor going to be more important? Am I going to have to share, affection with somebody else? And that, those fears are so natural and normal. One thing that I like to bring up is I was having conversation with an intended parent. I was going to use an egg donor and surrogacy also, and we were talking, about those, concerns about, the future contact, and if their son or daughter wanted to have, some kind of connection or relationship with the donor. And one thing that she said that I always bring up, because she just worded it so perfectly, and she said, I have never heard of anybody that has suffered from having too many positive connections in their life. And so that reflection is a really good example of someone that has really spent a lot of time really processing, the grief and the worries and the concerns, because she knew full well that didn't take anything away from her parenthood or from being a mother. And the social and cultural concerns are also very common. And so what that might look like is, concerns about your family, being different, or, what family's going to think. Are they going to treat, the child differently? Depending on every family, what does blood relationships mean to them? And so sometimes you're having also to educate people on the process of third party reproduction, and that can get to be very overwhelming, very disheartening. You can feel isolated at times because you're having to do that. And so just that whole concept of being different is a huge thing in terms of social concerns, as well as, many people have not shared, their fertility journey with anybody. And so talking about, disclosing or talking about egg donation is a way that, that's going to come up. And it's very unfortunate because sometimes there is, this stigma, that comes along with fertility. And so it creates, just feelings of shame that lead to wanting to create that secrecy. But I think that when you're going through this journey, when people ask, how do we tell other people? One thing that I will tell them is that you're really paving the road. And part of the work that you do in reflecting and honoring your feelings and exploring your fears and exploring your beliefs is part of you just really gaining that solid ground from which to just talk about it in a way that doesn't have that stigma. And another concern that I hear very often is, how do I know if I'm ready? So, you will never know 100%, but I will tell you that one of the things that I find when people are at a place where they are moving forward, and I will tell you, this really varies, okay? Because I have met with people, with couples, with intended parents that have done treatment after treatment after treatment, and they want to keep on trying, and that is okay. And I have met with people that are fully ready. They meet with the physician, they hear their percentages, and they are gung-ho, ready to go. Many of them are because they have been raised by, step parents, or have been adopted, or have been in an experience where they have had, they have known firsthand that having a genetic link really does not contribute to having a parent-child relationship. I have been a marriage and family therapist for over 20 years now. That sounds like a long time. But I will tell you, I've seen it all. I've seen, genetically related parents that have such damaged attachments, so many attachment wounds, and then worked with step parents and stepchildren and adopted children that have just the most amazing bond. And so I think that it's different for everybody. Some people that have lived through that are ready to move forward with the donor fairly quickly, whereas someone, might have to try as many times as will give them that peace of mind. And so one of the things that I will bring up is, I will say, if you have a thought that tells you in the future, your future self is going to look back and it's going to ask yourself, what if I would have tried again? Then it's important for them to do that. But there comes a point where you will guide yourself by having peace of mind. Okay. And so when you know you're ready, if there's anything close to that, is when you don't disregard. It doesn't mean that you're not going to have any feelings, of grieving, of sadness for this ideal child that you wanted to have through your own gametes. But you also have a sense of peace that you've done everything. And also, along with that, there's this sense of excitement about the possibility of having a healthy child. And so it builds up on itself. And so, going back to number 2, all of the number 1, 3, 4, and 5 really contribute to whether somebody wants to tell or not. But I'm going to talk about that later on when I talk about disclosure. And so in the next slide, this is kind of like where you bring it all together. Okay. So we started off with, opening your heart to the child that you're meant to have. Well, to be able to do that, you have to create a strong foundation. And that strong foundation is built through processing your grief, through exploring your fears, through examining your ideas about parenthood and what being a family means. And so it's really tough to do that if you don't feel it. I love this quote. you have to feel it to heal it. Okay. And so processing your grief, I talked about that a little bit already, and exploring your fears is so important. You can write, a list of, all of the different fears that you have in relation to, building your family through a donor. And then when I do counseling with people that are contemplating this decision, one of the questions, or even when I do the consultation meetings that ASRM, the Association of Reproductive Medicine, has some guidelines for anybody that will be using a third party. And so typically clinics will follow those guidelines. And one of those guidelines is to have a psychoeducational meeting with a mental health professional that specializes in third party reproduction. And it's mainly meant to be a supportive meeting where these are all the different things that we talk about. And one of the things that I always ask is, what does being a parent mean to you? What does family mean to you? And so, just right now, when I say that, what does being a parent mean to you? Just kind of, reflect on that a little bit. And one of the things that I hear most often is, we really want to extend our love. We want to be able to share our values. We want to be able to, we have so much love to give, and we want to create memories. We want to experience, just creating a human being that's going to be good in the world. And so most of those things are so unrelated to eggs or sperm, right? But that doesn't mean in any way that going through that process of grieving isn't important. So grieving that genetic link is really what helps you open your heart to the child that you're meant to have. There's a really great exercise that I often encourage people to do when they're ready. And it's to write a letter to that ideal child. Just let them know, everything that they want them to know, but also within that exercise to let them know why it's important to say goodbye to that ideal child, so that then you can open your heart fully to that child that you're meant to have. And so that foundation is completed with a narrative. Okay. And the narrative is the story that you are telling yourself. And that narrative is a combination that encompasses the grieving process, your journey up to coming to this point. But you don't want to make that part of your child's birth story. Okay. So you kind of work on all of that as part of your story. That's part of your narrative. But as you move forward using a donor, what you want to do is you want to also encompass, that story of hope, and it's the different way that you are forming your family. Okay. And so there's a theory in psychology that I really like. It's called logotherapy by Viktor Frankl. He developed the psychology of meaning. And one of the things that he said that would help people overcome tremendous amount of suffering is when they were able to find meaning in their suffering. So when you're suffering, when you find meaning in your suffering becomes meaningful. And one thing in terms of family building is that if you reflect on that and you focus on what it has taught you, and the meaning that it has in preparing you for parenthood, you can get so much growth, and you can really give it some significance. And so that is the narrative that you want to create, as part of building that strong foundation. And now remember, it takes time to process, okay? And it also takes time, okay? So you need to take your time. Remember that the timeline is really different for everybody, okay? And one of the components that happens also when you have decided to build your family through egg donation also is that you're taking away a little bit of that urgency where, I need to, try next month. And you want to give yourself that time to process, because what you're doing is, by giving yourself that time, is you're allowing yourself to build that foundation, to build it even more, because that is the beginning of your child's birth story. And so you almost want to see it as you are not doing any treatments anymore, but you are just finding a different way to build your family. You're making that transition. And when you're able to do all of that, what generates is this next slide. And this is a quote that I really like from Frozen. I don't know if you've seen that movie, but it says, "My love is not fragile." And so everything that I talked about really builds to this, okay, where you are really grounded in your role as being a parent, where you have embraced, you have processed, you have generated that self-love and self-compassion, and you have created this narrative that's going to put you on solid ground, so that when you are now transitioning into parenthood, your love is strong enough to be able to contain anything that's going to happen in your family. So it is really the foundation of building a healthy donor conceived family. But I will tell you, this concept of "my love isn't fragile" is something that applies to all families. One of the things that I tell parents all the time is the best way to take care of your children is to take care of yourself. And so that is what you become. You become this safe container, right? To be able then to create a strong and secure relationship and attachment for however your family story evolves, and anything that your child might need in terms of their healthy development. And we're going to talk a little bit more about disclosure then. And so now, you've been through all of this, right? You're at that point where you acknowledge your grief. It doesn't mean you don't have any feelings about it, but you have a sense of peace and excitement for moving forward. And so then this is where you have decided, okay, we are moving now forward with using a donor, and you go through the selection process. Now, one thing that I want to emphasize about the selection process is that it is very much tied into disclosure. Okay, but number one, it is so normal and it's so natural for just different emotions to come up when you are looking at these profiles. Okay. And you also want to decide, how are we going to go about it? Is it going to be, just one person, looking at them, or are you going to do it with your partner? Are you going to do it separately? And then are you going to compare? You also want to reflect on the type of relationship you might be envisioning in the future. So what I typically find is that when you have been able to process your fears and your concerns and examining your beliefs, there's more confidence in contemplating that possible future contact in the future with the donor. Now you will want to decide, do I use a close donor or a donor that's willing to be known at 18? Many people choose a known donor. And so you want to look at all those three. One thing that I will say, though, however, is that you want to remember that potential future contact is always possible. I have done many, many psychological screenings for donors. And one of the things that I really emphasize is that anonymity is not a guarantee. Okay, we live in a world of very advanced technology. There's 23andMe's, there's family ancestry, and there's a ton of other ones, which I just can't even keep up because there's so many. So I can only imagine that there's going to be much, much more than that. So you do want to remember this as you are selecting a donor. And you go through different filters, okay? And so that is really one of the first filters that you want to explore. Do I use an open identity donor? Do I do a close donation? Now, it is important that you understand that in your family structure, so let's say that you have a two-parent family, your donor conceived child is going to have three branches. Okay. So they have both your branches, and then they have this third branch, which is the donor. That's their DNA branch. Okay. So having, and we're going to talk about disclosure later on, but having curiosity or maybe needing medical information in the future is a very normal and natural thing. There are some countries that make it a legal requirement to give, the information of the donor because they consider that to be a birthright. And so an open identity consideration can be a very healthy model because you are giving your family that gift of an option in the future. And I also think that is that reflects a very mindful approach as far as the donor, because they're really, thinking about what this might mean in the future. And so when I counsel, when I do the psychological consultations with the donor, that's one thing that is extremely important. If a donor does not feel comfortable with knowing that anonymity is not a guarantee, that is definitely something that would, in my opinion, exclude them being an appropriate donor, because it might really bring up some consequences, psychological risk for them in the future. And then you also go through medical history, if there's genetic testing, anything that one of the genetic parents would be a carrier for. You obviously wouldn't choose that. There's also ethnicity, race, physical characteristics, hair color, eye color. Many people like to choose people that have some similar characteristics. And then also one thing that's super important in considering who you choose is to remember that when you select that donor, that's your first connection to your child. So you want to have a sense of connection with that person. So that's the general feeling that you get about that person. So, if there's a narrative on their motivation to donate, or their hobbies, their interests, their education, their career. So that's where you want to humanize the donor. You take some of the science out and you look at them in terms of, who they are, who the sense you get from them as a human being, and making that final choice. It could be very helpful if you do an exercise. And so that exercise is just imagining that at some point you are having a conversation with your son or daughter, and they're asking you, well, why did you choose that person? Well, what is it that you're going to tell them, that you liked about that person? And so, just talk about that person as you would. And so that's where, when I say donor selection is connected to disclosure, is a really, really important consideration. And so now let's move forward in talking about some disclosure considerations, okay? And so let's go through some of those. So remember, healthy disclosure begins with a solid foundation. How do you build that foundation? Remember, it's about, with everything that we've talked about up to now, processing your fears, processing your concerns, moving through the grieving process. Talked a little bit about the importance of making the list of your fears, your thoughts, the beliefs, the things that, come to mind as you are considering building your family through a donor. It's also important that you understand that you and your partner might feel differently. You can actually, one of you might be ready, and the other one might not. So you have to also take time to communicate and be respectful of where each of you is. And it's really important also that you separate your feelings from what you envision that your child will think or feel. Okay. And so again, we go back to that narrative, where you have your story before conception, but that is not your child's story, and your fears are not their fears. And this applies for just parenthood in general. What I always like to remind people when you're thinking of, becoming pregnant and having a baby is that baby is going to grow up, and that baby is going to think for himself. And what you think is not going to be necessarily what they think. And so those are just some of the considerations also when you're thinking about disclosure in terms of just being honest and creating that nucleus of support. And so you will get a sense of clarity, okay, from processing through the beliefs and attitudes that have been formed by your family experiences, culture, and society. And so all of these are very much related to how you will disclose in a way that will build a healthy donor-conceived family. And so now let's move on to the next slide. So if you can move on to the next slide. Okay. All right. So why tell? So having said everything that I have said, I will tell you that the Association for Reproductive Medicine quotes, I'm going to quote from them, while ultimately the choice of the recipient or intended parent, disclosure to donor-conceived persons of the use of donor gametes or embryos in their conception is strongly encouraged. And so this is why. Okay, first of all, because being honest creates an environment of openness, of trust, and honesty in your family. It helps foster healthy attachment, and you're also modeling honesty. So honesty and openness is really the foundation of creating healthy attachment. And as a marriage and family therapist, I can tell you secrets can be toxic in families, and they really destroy the trust, which is fundamental to creating healthy, lifelong relationships. So many times, parents might say, well, we're not going to disclose to protect, but they can actually end up causing more damage and negativity in the future, because keeping up with a story that isn't true really takes up a lot of energy. And there was actually, and I can't remember the exact study, but in a nutshell, it revealed that parents or mothers specifically that didn't disclose just displayed higher levels of anxiety in the future, because you're keeping this to yourself, and then you're having to go to the pediatrician, and you have to communicate the health history. And so those are some of the reasons to tell, and these are some more in the next slide. Also, as I talked about, anonymity is not a guarantee. This is what I like to say all the time. Just like the sun rises every day, so will the truth. And it's really not a matter of if somebody's going to find out they're donor conceived, it's a matter of when. And really finding out later in life can really lead to a sense of betrayal. There's a term called genetic bewilderment and identity confusion, because remember, that person would have lived their life, right? Knowing something that then later on just turns out to not be true. And so that can ultimately rupture, and create more damage than if there's honesty from the very beginning. And like I said, many donor conceived people believe it's their birthright to know their genetic identity. That's their medical history. That is just part of who they are. And you can always, you can talk to children about anything in age appropriate ways. And I will tell you, as a play therapist, children do great. Okay, when you give them something to work with. There's a saying in Adlerian psychology that says children are very keen observers, but very poor interpreters. And that is so true. In my practice as play therapist, I have parents that tell me all the time, oh, there's no way that so-and-so, knows about this. But then I see it just play out, evolve in their play. And of course they do. But the problem is that they come to their own conclusions. But when you give them something to work with, they will do great. Which leads me then to the next slide, which, is how do I tell? And so that is one of the more common questions that I get, and what I want to provide for you is a developmental model for disclosure. And so, so it kind of builds up on itself. You have the foundation, right there on the bottom. What does that entail? I've kind of repeated it a lot of times. You process your grief, the beliefs, you agree that genetic link, you create a narrative. Okay, then you've selected the donor. which you've done with all of the things that we talked about in mind. And then that creates a birth story. Okay. And so your son or daughter, will have a birth story like we all do. And their story is a story of love about how families are created in different ways. And that birth story you can start verbalizing when you're pregnant, when your child's a baby, obviously not because they're understanding it, but part of the strong foundation comes from you integrating that story very lovingly, because that is the way that you then transmit it. But to be very exact, the earlier on you start, the better. So about 2 years of age is a very appropriate age to start introducing what could be seen as a building block. Okay. And the best way to do that is through books. Children are at a stage of development that's called concrete operations when they're very young. And so they need very concrete things to understand the world. That's why books and toys, that's just their natural way of learning about the world. And so you read a book to them at 2, you let them know how that's similar to your family story. You leave that book accessible with all the other books that you might have. And then you remember that 6 months to a year makes a big difference. And so at 3, you give them another building block. Then at 4, you do that, or they might lead the way for you. Maybe they're the ones that will want you to read the story many times over. You know, anytime children are doing anything repetitively, that's a really good indication to you that they might be going through a cognitive state of development. Age 7 is a very normal age where children might start having more questions because they're leaving the family bubble. And now they understand in 2nd grade that there's this big world that they belong in, which will also depend on their personality. But then as they get closer to the preteen years, they start to develop abstract reasoning. And that's when everything comes together with reproductive health. And so that is where they will now understand. So what you've done before is they know, right? Before they understand. So by giving them the building blocks, you're helping them know. But then when they reach their teen years, they understand that there's a biological connection outside of your family. And so at that point, you know, the donor's not going to be referred to as, you know, a helper. They're going to understand that there is that biological connection. And the way to refer to the donor is going to be really dependent on them. You know, some donor conceived people like to call them, you know, genetic donor or biological mother. And so then they are a donor conceived adult, but you have kind of, you know, if you all, you know, took psychology courses, it's kind of like Maslow's, you know, hierarchy of needs. You know, all of these things have kind of created that really strong pyramid to just become a healthy, you know, donor conceived family. And so in the next slide, there's just some final thoughts in terms of disclosure. And I really like this slide because many times when people are in the treatment mode, their focus is on that baby. Okay. And so what I really always encourage people to remember is that that baby is going to grow up to be an adult. And so everything that you're doing right now and really setting that strong foundation to be able to open your heart to the child you're meant to have so that then you can build a healthy donor conceived family is done really thinking about this, that you're going to spend most of your life, the majority of your life, you're going to spend interacting with your kids as adults. Okay. And there comes a time when they will start thinking for themselves. And also remember, there is really no perfect way of communicating. Okay. There's really not one formula because your family will develop its own unique story. And finally, I want to leave you with this quote, with 2 quotes, right? This is from a book, The Donor Conception Network, okay, is a really great resource. Olivia Montasucci, or I must have pronounced her name wrong, but you know, she does such a wonderful job in creating the information. And in one of her latest booklets, it's called Continuing the Conversation, which is more for teenagers and adults. And this is from one of that booklet, and it's advice from 17-year-old Adam. And he says, the way you discuss the topic will influence how your child feels about it. Okay, so remember, you know, that goes back to how are you integrating it? So treat them like an adult, offer options and listen, be ready for emotions, make sure the focus is on their feelings and not yours, and give your child a sense of freedom, but keep a watching eye. And I want to close up with this quote. And this is not my quote. I read it somewhere along the way, so I can't give appropriate credit to whoever wrote it. But it says, when you want to be a parent, you will be a parent. The path to parenthood can come in many different ways, but when you hold your child in your arms, no matter how that child came into your life, there will be no doubt in your mind that that's the child you were meant to have. And I can tell you wholeheartedly that everything comes together. It connects the dots. And so I hope you have found this information helpful and useful. And I wish you the best in your journey, wherever it is that you might be.
Thank you so much, Mayu. I appreciate that. That's a lot of very helpful information. Here's some resources I believe that you have in case anybody wanted to check them out. We're going to switch gears just a little bit and talk about frozen donor eggs and why choose frozen donor eggs. What are some of the advantages of using frozen donor eggs? So an egg lot, you would receive 5 to 8 mature eggs, and these eggs are already frozen and they're ready to be shipped. And the reason we have them listed in a range is because every woman produces mature eggs in different numbers. And so we use an algorithm to ensure that we're only using the best mature eggs. There's no need for synchronization with the donor. So we're not having to prepare your uterus while we're stimulating the donor's ovaries. There's no chance a donor will drop out during the process or make a mistake taking medications. There's a wider variety to choose from when you use donor eggs, and you control the cycle and the timing for when it's convenient for you. And this is also really helpful too if you're using a gestational carrier. And then frozen donor eggs are less expensive than fresh donor eggs. So how successful is frozen donor egg treatment? Using an egg donor is the most successful of all the treatments in fertility. And I want to just point out a couple of the statistics here. You'll see 2019 and 2020. We're currently gathering data for 2021. But I want to point out the clinical pregnancy rate in 2020 was 61%. And that's a clinical pregnancy rate. So that's an actual ultrasound and seeing that gestational sac. And then also there's a 69% for excess embryos. So that means that there's excess embryos for future frozen transfers, 69% of the time. So let's talk a little bit about the programs that are available to you through Donor Egg Bank USA. So first, let's talk about the single egg lot plan. In this plan, you will receive 5 to 8 mature eggs, and it guarantees 1 or more blastocysts. The treatment is separate, so that would be paid separately to your fertility practice, and the price for this program is $14,500 US. In the double egg lot plan, you will receive 2 egg lots of 5 to 8 mature eggs. And so this plan does provide a discount off the egg lots, and it guarantees 2 or more blastocysts within those combined sets of eggs. Again, treatment is separate, and that would be paid directly to your fertility practice. And the price for this program is $27,500 US. So let's move into the single cycle plan. In this plan, here's where we are packaging the cost of the eggs with the cost of the treatment. Your physician has discounted the treatment fees. We've discounted the egg cost to create a package at one cost, or one-time payment. Full cost of treatment is reduced and inclusive in this plan, and it guarantees 1 or more blastocyst embryos. It also guarantees a treatment cycle. So here, what that means is if that the eggs and the treatment are both protected. So if an egg lot does not perform well, maybe no fertilization occurs and your cycle is canceled. If you were in a single egg lot plan or even a double egg lot plan, you may have to pay the clinic for treatment again. But if you were in the single cycle plan, that treatment would be guaranteed. Now, the cost for the single cycle plan is different with each fertility practice. It does vary. So if you contact us directly, we can provide the pricing for the fertility clinic that you're receiving treatment at. So the next plan I want to talk about is Assured Refund Plan. And this is our most popular plan. It's also my favorite plan, my personal favorite. After many years as an IVF nurse, there was this sense of relief when I knew my patients were enrolled in this plan, because I knew they had multiple opportunities for success. This plan guarantees a baby. It guarantees a baby. If you do not come home with a baby, you will receive 100% of your money back. And in the Assured Refund Plan, it offers up to 6 egg lots with unlimited FETs. If you choose to leave the plan on your own, you would receive 50% of your money back. And this plan does require that you become eligible for it. So you do have to qualify and apply for the program. But I'll tell you, 95% of the patients that apply are eligible, and 92% bring home a baby. So we found that some of the physicians like to keep the cost of eggs separate from the cost of treatment. And sometimes patients had insurance that covered the cost of treatment, but we still wanted to offer that live birth guarantee. So we came up with a multi-egg lot refund plan. It's very similar in a sense that it has that live birth guarantee. And if you don't bring home a baby, you receive 100% of your money back. It still has the 50% refund if you decide to withdraw from the plan on your own. A few key differences: you would receive up to 4 egg lots. And if you had insurance, then your clinic would bill your insurance directly or would collect for the treatment separately than what you would pay Donor Egg Bank USA. The cost of this plan is $30,000 US. So I want to just mention one last benefit that we really feel strongly about, and that's newborn stem cell protection. So free cord blood and tissue processing is offered through Cord Blood Registry, which is a sister company to Donor Egg Bank USA. And we strongly believe in the benefits of newborn stem cell storage for donor conceived children. And with this, you would also receive free storage for up to a year. So after all the time and money and effort you put into having a baby, you certainly want to protect your baby for a lifetime. And so this is really a great benefit for you. So what are your next steps? So you can go onto our website, www.donoreggbankusa.com, and for free, you can create a profile. Once you create a profile, a designated case manager will reach out to you, and then we can, start the process and look at the different financial plans that your particular fertility clinic has available for you. If you don't have a fertility clinic, we're happy to provide you with a list of clinics in your area and help connect you with one. We also have case managers available tonight. So if you'd like to call in, you can call directly to on our phone numbers right here, but you can call them directly. They're happy to help answer any questions that you may have. You can also use the email address listed here. And then also want to share Mayu's contact information. She's an amazing resource for patients, and I think she would be willing, of course, to talk to you. So we've put her number here as well. So I want to just take a quick look and see what questions we have. Looks like we have a few minutes still to get just a couple of questions. So is one of the first questions I see is there a psych evaluation required to be a parent using a frozen egg donation? And so I'll let Mayu kind of touch on this, but it's not an evaluation to say, are you psychologically approved to be a parent? That's not what it is. I think most clinics really just want to make sure, are you ready? Do you have those answers and those fears? Have you talked about it? I mean, Mayu, you would be a better person to answer that question.
Yeah, well, no, actually, you answered that perfectly, Becky. I appreciate that question so much because with the fertility clinics that I work with, I think people have that feeling, am I going to be assessed? And definitely not. I mean, it's so the Association for Reproductive Medicine has it as part of their guidelines to meet with a mental health professional that specializes in third party reproduction, but it's meant to be a psychosocial education meeting. So I do those meetings all the time. And my hope, as I am sure all my mental health professional colleagues hope, is to be a constructive part of that family building journey. And I mean, I can very blessedly say that most people end up saying, gosh, I'm really glad I had that meeting, but it is not an evaluation. Many clinics still kind of use that terminology, but just for the record here, it isn't. I mean, unless there was something like like super bad, very concerning for anybody's safety, then, that might be a concern. But other than that, it's really meant to be an educational meeting.
Great, thank you, Mayu. I see a question, do any of your plans include PGTA testing? Actually, I thought there was a slide in there, but we do have a UPOI guarantee rider. So if PGTA is something that you're very interested in, we also know that some physicians may recommend it from a medical standpoint. We do have a euploid rider that you can add to either a single egg lot or a double egg lot plan. The cost for that is $4,800, and it does offer up to 3 egg lots with that rider. Okay, let's see. Is there a maximum age for receiving a donor egg? That's going to be clinic specific. Each clinic has their own kind of cutoff for an age limit. So it really just depends on the clinic that you're receiving treatment at. So I would discuss that directly with them. Okay, let's see what else. Okay, Mayu, I have one for you. Okay, my husband and I want a known donor, but unfortunately the donors we felt to be the best matches so far have all requested a closed donation. I worry my donor conceived children will be curious and feel their identity is incomplete. How do we move past this?
Okay, so I would be concerned about a donor that wants to remain closed because of what I said earlier. Anonymity is not a guarantee. It's really putting you in a position to keep a secret, which is really not the ideal way to start a family. So I would really encourage you to look at other options. If it's going through the egg bank, choose an open identity donor. But like I said previously, one of my biggest criteria when I am doing my screenings for egg donors is that they understand that anonymity is not a guarantee, and many of them are very, very open and willing to be known in the future. So I think the best way to move past that is to put the best interest of your child before anything else. And that will certainly be to not create the situation where it has to remain closed.
And I have one last question for you, Mayu. Okay, do you have suggestions on how to help family members through this? While my parents are supportive, I don't think that they know how to process their feelings about my fertility process.
Okay, that is a great question. And the one thing I will tell you is you have to take care of yourself first. And I will tell you, once you have, remember when I talked about that narrative, once you have created that narrative, they will follow lead. And it's, parents, grandparents go through their process too. But I have a hunch that if you're okay, they'll ultimately be okay as well.
Awesome. And I'm sorry we can't get to all the questions, but we will take a look at them all. And you're welcome to, of course, reach out to us directly. We'd be happy to help answer any questions that you have. We're so grateful that you joined us this evening. Mayu, thank you so much for your expertise and your insight on this topic. And we look forward to hearing from you all soon. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.